Loving the Divorce Podcast? Take it further with Amicable Space, our exclusive membership for people navigating separation and divorce. Get expert webinars, exclusive content, a supportive community, and our Amicable Extras podcast with extended interviews and expert insights. Join today at amicable.space/membership because the right support makes all the difference. Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Susie Giles and Liz Harrington from Family Flow and Anthony Sider from Amicable to explore what being truly amicable looks like when a relationship ends. We unpack how Family Flow and Amicable each support couples through divorce, what amicable means in practice, and why it's sometimes more of an aspiration than a reality. Together, we dive into how things can shift from calm to conflict when solicitors and finances get involved, the common concerns women face when using joint divorce services, and how to create a fairer balance around money. Anthony also shares what support couples can expect from Amicable's experts during negotiations, and we wrap up with some practical tips for staying amicable and redefining your relationship post-split. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome all three.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to be here.
Lovely to see you all. Thanks ever so much for joining me. Now, the context for this podcast is all about what it means to be amicable. And I was thinking about this before you all came on. And sometimes I think we think of amicable as a digital concept. You're either amicable or you're not. So I want to bust that myth straight away. And I think we should call this episode 50 Shades of Amicable. So that's kind of my opener for 10. And I hope we get to talk about what being amicable means in the context of all the different work that we do in terms of families transitioning between divorce, separation, and family breakdown or relationship breakdown. But let's start, if we may, with Liz and Susie. Let's start off by telling us a little bit about Family Flow. So what kind of support do you offer? What led you to set up Family Flow?
So, I'll kick off if you want, because Family Flow actually grew out of my earlier work in parent coaching and family dynamics. And I was already supporting families through emotional behavioural challenges. And what kept showing up was some of the same underlying issues, so relationships breaking down, communication collapsing, and children caught in the middle. And so then when Liz and I met through a wonderful women's group, our experiences just really aligned. And Liz has brought such deep insight into trauma and abuse. And then it connected with the direction that I was travelling in towards trauma-informed and systemic support for families navigating separation. And I'll let Liz say a little bit more about what the work that we do in Family Flow now.
Sure. So I was doing a lot on money trauma. And what I kept coming up against was women and some men who had been financially abused or had gone through such significant financial trauma, mainly from divorce and breakup. So I went through my own divorce and then, as Susie's mentioned, we just were aligned and everything grew. And Family Flow, the Divorce Collective, we've kind of taken on a life of its own, which is really, really exciting. In terms of what we do, so we are divorce coaches and consultants. We help women, mainly women. We do work with men, but we have a group for women. Men we can offer support separately through the process, but we go deeper than that. So Susie's mentioned the family, the child angle that she comes from. I've got the therapy, the deeper work. So when you add it all together with our experience, we always say, we know our limitations. We're not lawyers. We're not financial advisors, but we do know a lot and we do know our limits. So people can come to us without as a first port of call a lot of the time. If only people found us before they just went straight to a solicitor. So we could guide them and give them alternatives and so on, and support them throughout the whole process. So I'm still doing the work I love with the recovery side of things, but we're covering women as they go through, not just at the end, which is brilliant. And we added in the Divorce Collective to the name Family Flow, because we have made such amazing partnerships like we have with you guys, which we absolutely adore. And we're trying to get out and influence. And, there's a certain amount of knowledge out there, but it's the people that get forgotten that we are hopefully going to be a voice for, the disadvantaged people, and really shining a light on that. So we're really excited to hopefully be able to influence at a higher level and change the divorce landscape. For all of us, for the better.
Well, that's so much to unpack there. But before I do, I'm just going to bring Anthony in so he can introduce himself. And Anthony, for people who've never heard of Amicable, what do Amicable do? How does it work? And how is it different to what Liz and Susie do? And I guess the other side of the coin that they mentioned, what lawyers do.
Yeah, absolutely. So primarily we are a couples-based service. So that's our main point of difference from solicitors, for example. So we work with couples from start to finish as part of their divorce or separation journey as well. So normally that is in our complete negotiation service, where they will have a divorce specialist working with them across a number of sessions to understand what their goals are, what their options are, and helping them to discuss and negotiate that as well. But we also offer sessions around separating with children for parents who are going through separation too, and other services alongside those.
So I guess the main difference is we're doing the divorce work and the financial remedy work, so the bit where you sort out your money and your finances and the divorce itself. And Family Flow are doing the sort of more emotional work around how you get to that point and looking at the different types of processes you might use to get there, and so further upstream. But then it sounds like Family Flow, you also do the kind of post-divorce recovery side of things as well. Is that fair enough?
Yes, we do. I mean, that's what I was focusing on. That's, I think, what we talked about in our last podcast, Kate, when I was just myself. As I said before, we're not lawyers or solicitors, but there are a lot of women that in our community, we have a free WhatsApp community, and there's no way they can afford legal advice. So we can guide them to the right places and maybe find, we do have partnerships with a lot of people. We're trying to get some people offering pro bono work, free work. I hope that doesn't open the floodgates too much for us. But, there are people out there that are doing, we can do this part of the divorce and we can give you just some advice for that section rather than doing the whole thing, which obviously, like all-in-one service like Amicable provide, that's the gold standard. We wish we could send everyone to you. But some people, they don't have, they can't even pay the mortgage. So we're trying to really help those people as well. And that's when we're really digging deep in our own knowledge, and we're learning so much as we go as well to ensure we can give the practical side. But as I said before, also know our limits.
Well, let's talk about this word amicable then. I'm not going to let Anthony go first, though, because that would be an unfair advantage, as that is the name of the company. But Susie, what do you think people interpret the word amicable to mean when it comes to divorcing and separation? And where do you think the misconceptions come in?
So, first off, I love that we're having this conversation, because I just think that what you've done at Amicable is really clever in so many ways, because holding this sort of word of hope out there is a really beautiful thing in a time for most people in their lives that is super hard. And it's a suggestion of what could be possible. But I suppose in the world that Liz and I are in, which is that it can feel quite the opposite of amicable. So actually, what does that mean? And this is the conversation Liz and I were having in great depth earlier today, which is actually the question is, what is the definition of amicable in the context of divorce, where people are in the situation because they probably don't like each other very much? And particularly for us in our community, where there often are very complex dynamics, often high conflict, and these are women generally moving through a situation that feels the opposite of amicable. So we were talking about it, and we were talking about how do we sort of reframe it? What does it actually mean? And I suppose for us, what the word amicable means is it doesn't mean being super close or super friendly, going out for dinner together still as a family, even though you're not together, which is, I think, what this sort of vision that people might bring to mind. So for people who've experienced a level of trauma or control, then being amicable in that way feels neither safe nor realistic. So for some people, it can feel like a pressure, a moral pressure that you might be failing if things are in your own situation is a bit messy or painful. So I suppose for us, where we boil it down to is amicable is being able to manage to be constructive and respectful and honouring your best self within the context of a very difficult situation. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Liz.
I think for me, and it was mainly after we had our conversation, Kate, where like all my fears of, is this right for people that are in conflict situations? You busted them all out the door. And I realised you don't have to be amicable to go through it. And this is us. So, we really hope this is helpful for other people. But it's an aspirational way of doing things. It's like we might really hate each other, but actually we want to do the best usually for the children, ideally for ourselves, and hopefully a bit at least for each other. But we want to do this in a way where we can look back in years to come and go, yeah, do you know what? I handled that right. I didn't stoop to the depths that I could have done. I put the past behind me and we did the best that we could do with what we had, especially for the children. So putting the children at the centre rather than the middle. And I know obviously there are people that get divorced that don't have children. And I don't know how many of your clients go through the process that don't have children. But there's such a massive part of it. And that's what's important. And I think just doing the best for them and having that aspiration of let's make this as amicable as we can be, then that, for me, that's what I think of now when I think of you guys.
And Anthony, from an insider's perspective, then we often say that, don't we, as Liz has just said, that amicable is very often for many of our customers an aspiration rather than their current reality. How do you experience it when you're talking to people when they're at the beginning of the process and they're maybe, ringing for a free 15-minute consultation and they're at the very start? What do you hear from people when we talk about amicable?
Yeah, so often I hear, initially on those initial conversations that they feel as though they're very amicable at the moment. But when you dig into that a little bit, it's because they haven't begun to have any of the difficult conversations that they need to. So it's more that it's amicable because we haven't got to the point where we're disagreeing yet. And so I think it connects to what you were all just saying around that idea of being amicable, because actually having different opinions and having disagreements, that's healthy. It's more about how those conversations are managed, making sure that everyone feels as though they're being listened to and they've got the space to actually have those opinions and have those thoughts. Because when we're talking around childcare arrangements or finances, there isn't a perfect solution. There's not one answer. What we've got to do is try and create an imperfect solution that works as best as it can on balance for everyone that's involved. And so naturally, you're unlikely to have an agreement where both of you are fully in agreement on every single point. So yeah, that's certainly not what being amicable requires.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really well-made point. I guess you've got this kind of situation where if you know you're coming into a negotiated solution and you're going to have to negotiate, it's all about the trust in the person who's running that negotiation and whether or not they can hold a safe space, whether they're robust enough to deal with all the trauma, the power imbalance, the abuse that you might have been suffering. And so if you're on the verge of making a decision about which process to go for, whether it's a negotiated solution or mediation versus going to a solicitor who is going to say things like, I will protect your interests, stick behind me, and I will do all of the battling and fighting for you. I guess that's quite alluring if you're coming from one of those relationships that you're describing. It certainly was my experience where you've been in an abusive relationship and you've had to struggle to have your voice heard and to stay safe in doing that. So Susie and Liz, then, what do you say to somebody whose experience is kind of screaming at them that what they need is protecting, and to this kind of lawyer figure to ride in on their white charger and metaphorically like protect and save? How do you make the argument to them that an amicable divorce might be actually a better thing to do? It feels like a big risk.
Yeah. For me, I think there's a lot of false belief about, and I'm not slagging off lawyers or solicitors. I know they've got like a hard job to do, but there's a lot of disbelief out there, a lot of fallacy about what they can do. And ultimately, if you've got a partner that isn't going to negotiate, isn't going to produce their financials, having a solicitor isn't going to make much difference. If they're that bad, it might be that you have to go to court, and you could spend thousands on a solicitor, thousands on mediation, and you're no further forward. And we hear that all the time. A lot of the people that come to us, they had some money to do it, but they've run out because they've spent it all. And now they're having to represent themselves in court, be a litigant in person. And as exactly as Anthony said, they might have been not too bad at the start, but because they got solicitors involved straight away, and you started having, or they did or they didn't, they started to have the difficult conversations about the finances, either themselves or with the solicitor or in mediation. That's when my mediation broke down when I got divorced, was when, as soon as we started talking about finances, that they're not being carried through that process. It's just, it meets a dead end. Doesn't always happen, obviously, but if you've got one party that's totally unwilling, it's like, actually, if you got them to you guys sooner, you could have avoided that. I absolutely know, exactly like Anthony said, my divorce was really amicable. We were doing great. And then a couple of things went wrong. And then I said, do you know what? I think we should have done a financial consent order, because stupidly, I didn't get one done. Never do that. And that's when it got really bad. And I don't want anyone to think, oh, I won't do the finances then. Actually, if we'd done it at the start with someone like you guys properly, we wouldn't be in the mess that we wouldn't have gone through the mess that we went through, which was absolutely hellish. So, yeah, I hope that answers that.
I think that's a really good point, because I think sometimes where people do feel as though things are going really well, they're really amicable, they think, well, maybe this side of things isn't as much of a priority or isn't as important. And they sort of ride that wave of goodwill where everyone's being so amicable, but all we're actually doing is avoiding those difficult conversations that need to happen, but they need to happen safely. So actually doing it at a point where things are going well, it is a good time to do it, even if it feels like it might not be necessary or as important as when it goes wrong, because it's a lot harder to get it back on track if you wait until that point.
Fear of rocking the boat is massive, isn't it? I mean, that fear of being the one that's sort of chucking the hand grenade in just by asking what we would consider to be a perfectly reasonable question. But it can be quite terrifying, especially if you've got the past relationship experience of knowing how quickly arguments can escalate between the two of you and how nasty they can get. I think people do tread on eggshells. So I think it's a really good kind of tip for anybody listening. Don't be swayed by the idea that, rocking the boat is a bad thing. Get those conversations in early. But from what everyone is saying, it's important to have those conversations in a safe space. And Susie, I don't know whether you would agree with Liz, but it feels like the solicitor is not necessarily the safest of spaces.
I think it's complex. And I think, so going back to your original question, which was, how do you encourage people to try and proceed with an amicable approach when they do have the fear? I think that, that was kind of along the lines of your question, and they want to hunker down behind their solicitor. So I think the bottom line is this process is going to be painful. I mean, not always, but mostly. And so ultimately is, how are we going to make it as manageable and the least painful as possible? And one of the answers to that is to get through it as quickly as possible. And the problem with entering the legal system, so solicitors, et cetera, is it just massively increases the chance of this going on and on and on. And meanwhile, you're all being held in limbo. So both parties, both adults and the children, nobody has clarity on how they're moving forward, what choices are available to them in their future life. And so there are many amazing lawyers out there, and let's not forget that. There are some people doing incredible work to improve the lives of families and the system. However, it is also very easy to get caught up with the to and fro with lawyers and not making any progress. And meanwhile, your sanity and your bank balance, if you had one in the first place, are massively depleting. So to go back to that question, even if it feels really, really hard, to consider working with your ex in the most constructive format possible, it isn't impossible. And with the right team around you, so the people, we have lots of clients who've been working with you, and they speak so highly of how the specialists are holding them in difficult times. And also then if you have support when needed from the likes of Liz and I, who are also able to help support them and guide them so they can ask the difficult questions and they can have the confidence to feel like they can use their voice, which is often, I think, what people are scared of doing, which is why they hunker down behind a solicitor, because they have been, as you alluded to before, their voice hasn't been heard in their relationship for a long time. And there's a high chance it's not being heard during their separation and divorce because of power imbalance as well. So if they feel they have got the right team around them to strengthen and empower them, then, without a shadow of a doubt, the quicker you can move through this in the most constructive and collaborative way, the better chance you've got to get to the other side, which ultimately, sorry, I'm going off on one now, but if we want to think about what is an amicable divorce, it doesn't necessarily mean that the process is amicable, but it might be giving you the best chance of some level of amicability in the future once the world has turned a few times and things have settled down.
Yeah, I think that, to me, that's what an amicable divorce is. It's a divorce where there is the possibility of a relationship, usually a co-parenting relationship, post-divorce. That, to me, that's it. And as you say, it might be pretty ugly and messy in the run-up, but that's just like, getting ready to go out. The end result looks okay, but getting there, you might have had your rollers in and no makeup on and look a right state. But do you know what I mean? It's kind of like all roads lead to here kind of thing. So I think, and it's okay if we're not trying to make out that this is a lovely process that you're going to skip through the flower fields to get to. It's hard work. It's hard work emotionally and physically. And therefore, it's not going to be pretty. But I think if you've got the opportunity for that relationship, to me, that's absolutely priceless. Anthony, I was going to ask you, when Susie was talking then, what do you think really makes the idea of, it's not what makes, but this idea that there's a team of people and that it's not just one provider or another provider, but actually getting the right support around you. How important is that? And does the amicable process, as kind of you administer it, if you like, does that still work? And is it good to have people like Susie and Liz in the background?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is about considering what you're going to need to get through this process. Like we've just been discussing, no one is under any illusion that it's going to be a straightforward, smooth process, even for the people that are truly as amicable as they possibly could be. It's always going to be difficult, and it's going to be difficult in different ways and at different points of time. So it's worthwhile considering what support do I need during that. And sometimes it's getting some therapeutic support. Sometimes it's getting some coaching. Sometimes it's getting some specific financial information. And part of what we do at Amicable is we work with our couples to understand where they might need that support. And we might say, look, actually, rather than having our next session, why don't we break for a month or a couple of months while you go and get some support in this area? Or, for some people, it's just needing to take a step back and, go on their holiday for a couple of weeks and not have to think about this. So yeah, it's a team of people, but it's also trying not to compare your divorce or separation process to anyone else's, because it's different for everyone. But yeah, I think getting as much support as possible in those different ways can only help.
Both ladies mentioned the idea of working with women, and often women who feel that who have been traumatized and who have, had a difficult path to getting to the point where they're going to separate. What do you think the specific concerns are, Liz, from women about having an amicable divorce?
I think the biggest concern, if it's really difficult, I guess, is like, if it's terrible, I've got to sit in a room with them. What we hear the most is there's no way he'll do that. And I really wish I didn't have to generalize. Obviously, we do hear it from women because we work with more women. And I'm sure there are some men out there going, she won't do that. But there's it's very much, he won't do that, so it's off the table. We won't do that either, so it's off the table. And it's very fixed. Oh, how can we get to those people and convince them? It's like we need to force them to have a conversation with you, okay, and get them in a room with you so you can convince them that it's the right thing. So we do try. And I think having conversations like this about how productive the process is. And you're not there to, to take sides. You're there to get the result that everyone wants, that's in the best interests of all parties and the children. And like Anthony said earlier, some things are not going to, you're not going to like everything. You're not going to like everything anyway. There's no winners in divorce. There shouldn't be anyway. Sadly, I think sometimes there are, actually. I'll change that comment slightly. But there are a lot of losers, and we're all going to lose something. And I think if everyone's really happy after a divorce, well, I'd like to meet them.
Yeah, Susie, what about you? Do you think there's specific things that women in particular are concerned about when faced with a choice between how to divorce and whether to do a process like Amicable?
I do think it comes back to what I was saying before about, and again, it's a generalization, but it comes back to this power imbalance that we've talked about, and women not feeling close enough to, it's often on the financial side, so not close enough to the family finances, not having a grasp of what's been going on, because, whether we like it or not, the world still does exist, that often there is a gender imbalance in the families, and women have stepped aside, or either fully or partially, from their careers. They focused on the family, and somehow in that they can end up not being close to what the utility bills are, what the mortgage is, and all of that kind of thing. And so then they come to the table, the thought of coming to the table to have a conversation with somebody who's holding the financial power, which is basically setting them up for their future and their children's future, can feel really vulnerable. And so the thought of having to come to that table on a level playing field, because that's what you feel like you might be doing if you're going to be working as a couple, rather than having someone in your corner and them having someone in their corner. It can feel basically like a really vulnerable position. And also, if you feel like you haven't been listened to in your marriage and you've slowly been silenced, and that is a thing that happens to women. It's it's a global thing, and a very personal thing. Women can often feel undermined, that their voices aren't important, that they're not being listened to, that they don't have the same. They also, because women often haven't been in the workplace, they haven't been in meeting rooms, they haven't been in boardrooms, they haven't been using their voice to express their power, express their point of view, then to think about sitting down at a metaphorical table with the person who's holding the cards and to try and to put their point of view across, they can just not want to do it, because it brings up so much anxiety and so much feelings of vulnerability, when also their eyes are often on their children, and they're thinking, my children are experiencing the fallout of this broken relationship, so I'm going to put my energy into that. I don't want to have to try and negotiate my way through a financial situation that I basically don't understand, because I don't really know what's been going on in our financial life. So I'm just going to let someone else do it for me. So it takes a huge amount of courage often for a woman to step into this sphere. And we really see that and we acknowledge it. And I know you do too, Amicable as well. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
I recognise all of that, with what you're saying. That's something I think, Anthony, we hear a lot of the time, isn't it? So how do we level that playing field? What do we do to give people the confidence to come into that scenario when, as Susie's described, they're feeling all of that weight of, how many times do we hear people say, my husband negotiates for a living, I won't stand a chance? That's perhaps one of the most common concerns that people have. What do we do to kind of level that playing field for people in that scenario?
So I think the first thing is that we start at the beginning. One person might feel as though they've already got all of that information. They've already got that full understanding, particularly of the finances. But it's still important to start at the beginning, because we need to make sure that both of you have all of the information you need and are aware of what all of your options are. Because without having an understanding of all of the information, how can you possibly know if what you're agreeing to is fair? And if that means moving a little bit slower, that means moving a little bit slower. But I think the other point that I would make as well, which is on a bit of a tangent from that, is, just going with that example, which we do see all the time, it's almost the opposite is true when it comes to the childcare conversations, because all of the knowledge is held there usually by mum in that situation about what the kids' routines are, when parent-teacher interviews are. That comes up, things like that come up all the time. And dad needs that information from mum just as much as mum needs the information about finances from dad, if we're going for that example. So I think it's making sure that we've got the space and we've got the time to talk everything through. And so again, it just comes back to not rushing through anything, because these decisions are too important and you only get one shot at making them. You don't want in 6 months' time, when the four of us have stepped away, to be thinking, oh, what did I agree to that for? I wish I thought about that for a little bit longer. If you need the time, take the time now.
But also, I would say as well, Anthony, we are quite partisan in the way we help people, in the sense that we are a couples service. We don't favour one or the other. But that doesn't mean we have to dish out and be exactly the same in a robotic way to both people. I think one of the things that we're really good at that other services aren't, if I'm going to really stick, now my colours to the flag here, is that we can genuinely see where people need a different type of support. And if it is that confidence building, how many times have you done an extra session where you just sit down with the person who's in a weaker financial position? I know we're using the example of the wife, but it isn't always. But you sit down with the person in the weaker financial position and you literally go through one of our spreadsheets with them line by line until you're absolutely confident that they get it and they understand it and they feel confident to say, well, actually, if we go with that solution, you can see, I don't think I'm going to have enough money, or I'm not going to be able to do this. And you give them the opportunity just to work through that bit on their own with you. And I think that's what makes the service sort of unique and special, is that we have the ability to understand what both people need and to be able to then shape the service to what they need, so we can genuinely level the playing field, not just dish out the same float or support to both people and hope it fits kind of thing. I think that's what makes it different.
I think that the way that we do that as well is by building that rapport and building that trust with the people that we're working at, which is why, yes, although this is primarily a legal service, we always put the human aspect of that first, because if we're not putting that human aspect first, we're not getting to know the people that we're working with. We're not building that trust with them. And then they're not going to open up to us where those vulnerabilities are. And I think there's a lot of stigma and a lot of shame and embarrassment sometimes that people hold for not knowing that information. So you've got to get to a point where they trust you enough to drop that guard, or else you're not going to know that there was an issue to begin with. But again, it's them that have to live out the consequences of that, not us. So it's important that we get to that point.
It's only through working with you more closely, and obviously our clients going through the process, that we realise you guys, you're not just negotiators. You do get the emotional side of things, and that's obvious from this conversation. And you can be, that safe person to guide them through it. And, you're not therapists, but you're doing a really good job at supporting these people through it. And I think I don't know if people would think that was part of the service, and I think anyone out there that is listening and that is worried about all the things we've been talking about, they should call you, because I think hopefully they've been reassured just from this conversation. But it's that side of things that I think people don't realise that you do so well. And it's really it makes me feel just really hopeful that and pleased for these people. I so wish we'd found you 5 years ago. I really do. It would have been very different. And there's just one other tiny thing. It's a bit of a tangent, but in terms of what might put people off, I think when you see the cost of Amicable, some people are like, oh, it's too expensive. But actually, it's very easy to do the numbers and realise it's really not. I mean, how long's a piece of string if you're going through solicitors? And it could be thousands upon thousands. And if you don't, like we were saying, if you don't get that financial stuff sorted and you have to do it further down the road, it's going to cost more money, because you're probably going to be doing it through solicitors. I represented myself. My ex-husband used a solicitor. He's up to probably at least 20 grand. And we could have saved all that money.
Can I speak to this question about how do we level the playing field? Because I have a dream, in the words of Martin Luther King. So my dream is that every couple that enters the separation and divorce space, it starts with a power-aware conversation. And so it's about psychoeducation. And I think that this is a hugely missing piece of the separation and divorce space, which is that some couples, there isn't a power dynamic, but there very often is, and it's much more than we appreciate. And it's not about shaming the person who holds the power, because chances are there's a very high chance that they are not aware of the dynamic exists themselves. So it's about helping the couple together understand what might have been at play and we are going to be working within that framework. So when we see a power imbalance happening, or something is playing out in these negotiations, we are just going to name it. And it's not to shame you. It's not to put you in the spotlight, but it's just to bring us back to what is level here and how are we going to move through this. And then the other thing that I want to say is just about it's about this, and it's a very, Liz and I are both trauma-informed coaches, and it's a more visible part of this landscape now, but it's about having practitioners that are trauma aware, and so that they know that in the way that you were describing, Anthony, which is, about working with one of the parties to help them understand where they're at. It's about being able to work knowing that the chances are they can't even take on information because their brain is so overwhelmed with what's going on. So how do we resource that person to be able to move through the process, given the fact that their brain is probably offline because they're so kind of traumatized and overwhelmed by what's going on? So those are my two level the playing field thoughts.
That's really interesting. That last one is so important, because we were talking about this the other week with the divorce specialist, because I do the inductions when we have new people. We've got new people coming all the time because we're growing so quickly at the moment. And I always say in the induction, the key thing we have to remember is whenever we're interacting with people, we're interacting with people who are hearing this information for the first time, who are emotionally probably at their worst, and who are cognitively depleted. And we have to do everything in the work that we do, remembering those three things, because that's a different audience to just sitting here on a Tuesday afternoon having an intellectual chat about, what it's like for people. And I get that, and this is important. But when we're speaking to people who are actually in the midst of it, those three factors are always at play. We have to remember that, because if we are on our own little track of I've done this 10 times this week or whatever, it just doesn't feel right for people. And we have the privilege of working with people at their most vulnerable time, and we've got to be really good at being able to walk alongside and not in front. And that really is something that's important to us, I think. Yeah. So thank you for that.
That's why but especially me, because I'm the somatic person that does it. But in terms of I use EFT, emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping, and other techniques to do that really deep healing work. And I think historically that's often come at the end when we have space to do it. But actually to do it while you're going through, and you're not going to fix, you're not going to be able to do the deeper past work, all of it, if only we could. But often time and budget doesn't allow for that. But to enable you to get the trauma out of your body as much as you can, and there will be stuff that comes afterwards, but to get that out and to learn how to regulate your nervous system, and to understand that you're not going mad, you're not unhinged, you haven't got necessarily a mental health issue. You might need some medical help alongside that through the really dark times, but your body is trying to keep you safe through this, which is why it's triggering the anxiety, why it's triggering the nervous system reaction. And I think understanding how the body works like that, and then releasing it somatically as well, and giving the client the tools to do that themselves. Like when they're in a negotiation, they could be tapping on their hand under the table, or doing a grounding exercise that no one needs to know they're doing, but just to help them just be able to breathe and calm down and be able to focus a bit better. So that's why I think we do so much, but we're not generalists. We do so much, and we're so passionate about that side, because that will help as well as all these other things to make the process as good as it can be.
Anthony, Liz and Susie have both sort of given really lovely overviews in terms of the support and help they give people who are going through this, who aren't necessarily in a process like Amicable or might be. What do you think, from listening to what they said, what's the kind of, if you like, what's the definition of being able to work together? So not being brilliant at it, not smashing it, not knocking it out the park, but just what's the kind of base level of being able to work together, given what we've heard so far today?
So I think a really key thing is, even though our sessions are done remotely on a video call, still being able to be on that screen, see them on that screen, that, you've got to think about, where are you going to be for that call? Are you going to be in your house? How are you going to feel if you're in your new house with your ex-partner on the screen? Is it better to try and find somewhere else to have that call, so that when you close the laptop, you can then leave that place and go home? So it's thinking about those sorts of things. In the session, being able to not necessarily agree, but actively listen. So be able to actively listen to what the other person is saying, trying to sort of understand where they're coming from. And then, of course, being in a position where you feel comfortable and safe to speak your opinions and your thoughts too, with the trust that those are going to be listened to, and that the person facilitating that session is going to be able to manage that as well. So I think those are the main things, rather than are we going to be able to reach an agreement or the details of what those discussions will be. It's actually, can I have a conversation with this person? Can I sit there for an hour and have a conversation with them with some assistance?
Well, what do you think people can expect from the negotiation specialist in that scenario as well?
Yeah, so I think that they can very rightfully expect that we're going to be balanced in terms of the time that we're giving each person to talk, that we're going to be able to manage and control that environment and make sure that we're keeping people safe. I think people can expect that if it starts to feel as though that session is going a little bit backwards, a little bit unproductive, that we would stop that session, or at the very least take a bit of a pause if we needed to as well. And I think mainly they should be able to expect that we are going to respect whatever their views and opinions are, even if they're ones that we might have to raise more questions to, or ones that, from a legal perspective might not work, that there's still enough respect there to have the discussion and talk it through. There's nothing that shouldn't be able to be, at the very least, discussed.
And so our guests are going to share their top tips on how to remain amicable during the divorce process. And I'm sure none of anybody listening wants to miss those. But before that, if this episode has resonated, or it's given you a bit of clarity or comfort, or just a tip that's made you feel things might be more manageable, please make sure to follow the Divorce Podcast on your favorite podcast streaming apps. And each week we're here with expert advice and real support to help you through this process, whether it's separation or divorce, one step at a time. So do download, do subscribe, and keep up to date with all the information about the divorce and separation journey. Okay then, chaps. So final tips: how to be amicable during the divorce process, and how to redefine the relationship you have with your partner post-split. So who wants to start? Shall I go to Susie first?
Okay. So I think that the greatest tip is to really get close to yourself and to make sure that you're honouring yourself through the process in a way that gives you the best chance of coming out the other side in an amicable way, if that's what you want. And to do that, I believe that amicable could be reframed as just being clear and consistent and boundaried about your own point of view and your own energy. And that's the best way to give yourself a chance of being amicable.
Fantastic. Thank you. Liz?
Well, work with us and you guys, obviously. But no, honestly, I think if you can leave your ego to one side, that is helpful. Get lots of help, work with professionals, get some therapy, and center it around the children. And I think even if, I listened, there's a few podcasts I've listened to, especially around co-parenting, and I'm like, but I cannot co-parent with my ex.
Yeah,
and you're making me feel like I failed.
Makes you feel bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, if you can't do this, that there are some people that it's not possible. So just remain true to yourself and be the parent that you want your kids, that you would want to have through this process, that you want your kids to have, even if the other parent is not playing the game, is destructive, whatever. Be the safe person for your children, because even if they've got one safe parent, they should be okay. They probably need therapy as well, but we can deal with that later.
Inevitably. But yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Therapy for my children. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Liz. And Anthony, what are your top tips?
Yeah, so I think I'll give a tip that's a little bit different from the other two, which is more around in your financial agreement where you're sort of a little bit further down the line, you're trying to find that compromise, you're stuck on those last couple of bits. My top tip would be that it's not just a financial decision. You also need to consider how much value you're placing on your time, the stress of the process, the emotional aspect. All of that has a value as well. And it might be that that means you're moving slightly from your position. But if that means that you're able to then get this done, completed in a way that enables you to move forward and work towards being amicable, I think it's taking into account that value, not just the monetary figures.
Not just the number on the spreadsheet, is it? You're
Absolutely.
absolutely right. Yeah. Well, look, they were great tips. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies, where can people find out more about Family Flow?
Our website is bestbetfamilyflow.co.uk. We are on socials, but the website's the best place, and we can give you some links to put in the show notes as well.
Or they can email us, Susie or Liz at familyflow.co.uk, and we're always at the end of an email.
Fabulous. Thank you. And you can also, for separation and co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk. You can explore our free resources or book a free advice consultation as well. And of course, you can hear more about the podcast episodes by subscribing for updates or visiting thedivorcepodcast.com or download on your favorite listening platform. And finally, we would love to know how we can help further. So if you have ideas or thoughts around what you'd like to hear on the podcast, please do get in touch at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you very much, Anthony, Susie, and Liz, for your time today. It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation. And thank you, everyone, for listening.